Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Entra Chat. I'm back home in Melbourne today, and this week's episode is us going through all the latest updates that dropped last month. So welcome to the show. We have Nathan McNulty from Alaska joining us, and we have Daniel Bradley as well, and he's joining us from, are you in London, Daniel, or close by?
No, a little bit south of London.
Nice. Okay, cool. So we have Melbourne, Alaska, and Daniel in completely like three different time zones as well. Nathan, I'm sure people have heard you many times, but if maybe both of you can give a quick intro, tell us what you're working on recently.
Yeah, sure. Nathan McNulty, Senior Security Solutions Architect at Patriot Consulting, Microsoft MVP in Security. I've been around since it was live at EDU, then BPOS, and then Office 365. So I'm kind of old. And yeah, I've been working with Entra, Azure AD stuff since then. Lately, been doing a lot of actually different endpoint deployments, and then just anything that's in Entra. I'm our practice lead for identity. So yeah,
Nice,
cool. Yeah, Daniel, Senior Solution Architect for CDW down here in the UK. Also an MVP in identity security and M365 for Graph API. I'm in a slightly different role. I'm in pre-sales, so I'm a sales guy, formerly consultant. Done a lot of work in
highly technical
mergers, acquisitions, and highly technical role. Done a lot of work in mergers and acquisitions and migration space at the moment, which is a lot of.
I think you might be the rare unicorn who is in sort of pre-sales, but also in the weeds in all the features.
I spent too many weekends lying on my back on the server room floor, finishing off migrations at 4 a.m. And I thought I'll switch the stress types to sales.
It's good to be well-rounded, doing different things.
Absolutely.
For me, I need to be like building stuff, writing code. I can't get too far away from that.
Well, that's the great thing about my role. It's fairly flexible. So I get the chance to build our assessment services and tools. I do a lot with Meister.
Nice.
Which is good. And it's still fun.
Yeah. And Nathan, you've been doing some fun stuff with Meister as well, right?
Yeah. Getting deployment through AZD. Yeah, it's been fun.
Nice. Cool. Awesome. So let's get into the news and announcements. I think we have two follow-up items from the last month's Entra Chat episode on, what's new. The first one is the most popular one is on the whole passkey thing. There's been an update in the message center post as well. So on the 2nd of March, there was an update with some clarification on the actual rollout with some dates as well. Nathan, or Daniel, you want to walk us through?
Yeah, I'll give this one to Nathan.
Okay, great. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, if you previously have never enabled passkeys, then it won't affect you at all. And if you have attestation enforced, then that won't affect you either. Make sure I'm honest here, Meryl.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, so as long as those two things, if you've never enabled it or you currently have attestation enforced, which really recommended you do, that will none of these changes coming will end up affecting you. And so what we're going to end up having is the syncable passkeys will get auto-enabled. We'll have the passkey profiles as they roll out. And then there's also some changes with the registration campaign. Did we want to kind of lump those two together as part of how that flows? Yeah. Yeah, so the registration campaign or the nudge feature, if you currently are in a Microsoft enabled or Microsoft managed state, I should say, then once all of these changes happen, users will start to get nudged every day. Is that correct? Basically to get
every day with no
yeah, right. So just every single day, they're going to get prompted to set up Microsoft Authenticator, and that will also include passkey registration as part of that process. However, if you have this state set to enabled in the portal, like you're managing your own settings, then that will just stay with the traditional push. And of course, disabled stays disabled, obviously. So yeah, my recommendation, I think I mentioned earlier in the week, was really go configure the passkey profiles the way that you want them ahead of time. Right. I would recommend setting one up that's the default profile is an enforce attestation, create a secondary profile that is allowing for Syncable for that corner case, right? Set a security group or two, and then govern those, add people in as, absolutely necessary. But there are really good reasons to enforce attestation. So I don't know if you wanted to
Right.
dive into attestation and how that.
That's an interesting one. Right? But before you jump into that, there's one more thing that there are specific dates. I think they're in the update. So it says April to May is when it will apply to all the worldwide tenants, so all the public tenants. And then June is when it will apply to the GCC and the DOD environments as well. So that's there. So the biggest change is right now, if you go to the portal into your auth methods, you will see this option to opt in to the public preview. So that's basically what is changing. You have an opt-in, which you can opt into today for Passkeys, and then you can set things up. If you leave that as it is and you don't have any Passkeys configured, then you go into this new one, right? So in the overall scheme of things, today people are using phishable auth, right? And there are like 80% or more of Microsoft Entra tenants where the folks who, like whoever is the admin, they don't even know what Entra is, right? In M365 portal, they might see that identity and they click on it, but they don't even come into the Entra portal. So like those are the tenants where they maybe don't even have MFA, and then the secure defaults like would have turned on MFA. So I'm looking at in the view of all those tenants as well, right? Which they don't really even have an IT team managing their tenant. So how do we get them? How do we get more of the world moving to phishing resistant authentication? And the answer for a lot of those cases is Syncable Passkeys, which is, they use it on their phone, they register natively with the phone, no apps to download. It goes into iCloud or it goes into the Google Password Manager, wherever. And then when they get a new device, they sign into iCloud, it all just works. Today it doesn't, right? And it's very painful today. And for those users, a lot of that works. So we sort of raise the bar on moving to the phishing resistant authentication. And the hope is then the attackers would go towards other applications, which are a bit more easier to phish before they, do that.
Is it worth highlighting, Meryl, as well, the registration prompts for registration campaigns, right? With this change, it won't just be targeting non-Authenticator MFA. Users with Authenticator will be targeted for Passkey as well.
For Passkeys, right? Yeah. Because if you just ask, like, say, there are lots of mom and pop shops, like they don't have any IT or they didn't even know what MFA was, right, when it first rolled out. And they're never going to go and, I need to now set up my phishing resistant auth, go into my sign-ins and force it like we do with, how we handhold enterprise users. And the campaign sort of helps move those identities all to phishing resistant. So it's more about how we move the wider Microsoft 365 community and all of that to phishing resistant. So that's where like this attestation comes in. Nathan, you want to explain what? Now you said attestation should be turned on. How does that affect synced passkeys and device bound?
Yeah, that's fun. So attestation, Passkeys, FIDO Alliance, right? They defined, or industry came together and defined what that protocol should look like. And so they assess, what does the implementation look like? They sign off on it, right? And they have a private key that is associated with an AA GUID. So if you've seen that AA GUID list, kind of the key restrictions in Entra, that's mapping back to a private key that is burned into similar software stacks, as far as I can kind of explain it. So on a YubiKey, we might have that same attestation certificate across 6-7 models, because they all use similar software stacks or firmware stacks, whatever you want to call it. And so, that privacy preserving, not each one has an individual same or a unique certificate, so they can't track you across different services, but it's shared across lots of models. And that gives us confidence that the private key or the passkey that we generated is being served back or answering the challenge from the same authenticator that it was originally registered on. So it's coming back from another YubiKey, right? So you'd have to steal the private key, put it back into a different YubiKey of the same model and firmware version and all that, and then reuse it, right? So it makes it a lot harder for sure. It just ensures it's coming from the correct authenticator.
So if you're like me and you need the 5-year-old explanation of that, it's specifying specific models, right? That you can only use specific models.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So
it's the same as the chip on a credit card, right? like the chip on the credit card, it kind of like uniquely, it's more unique than just like, I read the numbers, it's printed on it, right? I can't just have another one that looks identical. They type in the numbers and have you charge it anymore. It's got that extra special chip on there, right? It's kind of like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you said like when you go into the Entra Auth Methods portal for Passkeys, it has those options, right? Like attestation, whether to enforce or not. How does that impact the device bound and the synced story? Yeah. So we are just for those who are listening, we've opened up the Entra portal and we've gone to the authentication methods and opened the passkey settings, right? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And so once we come in here, if you go to add a profile, you'll notice that when you go to check the box for enforce attestation, or I guess select your synced, right? Once you check that box, it takes away the synced, and I don't have an option for it anymore. And that's because that synced doesn't currently do any kind of attestation. We can't guarantee the model. We're not requiring it be sent back, I guess. And so the downside, or I guess the benefit, the device bound, when we do attestation, we know that the authenticator that it was saved in. When we don't allow or enforce that, now I create a software-based one. It could be stored on disk. So I've written some scripts that'll do this for us, right? We save the private key locally. And actually, that was a lot of work that Fabian Bader did. But I've also done one where you can store it in Key Vault or generate the private key in Key Vault, right? So that's nice, HSM key backed and everything. But unfortunately, it still doesn't like send attestation certificates back or anything to tell us that it was stored securely, right?
And I think that's the reason, right? Because it's software based, it's not hardware bound. It can move around. Like the whole idea is you have one iPhone, it gets synced to iCloud, you go to another iPhone. So technically, it's not from the same device when you sign in. And that is the reason why it's sort of the software-based ones, like the Apple, the iPhone, they say they can't attest to it, right? That it's coming from the same device, so it's not possible. So when you enforce attestation, you can't choose synced. It has to be device-bound.
So that's a hot take, right? What's your opinion, Merrill? Because when I last talked around synced versus device-bound, and I'm an advocate for synced passkeys, but there's a lot of controversy around my recommendations around the use of passkeys.
Is it controversial? So I'm with you, even with device-bound, like I've worked with so many customers, they struggle to turn on device-bound passkeys, right? Because the users have different versions of Android and iOS. They have Authenticator app and the steps to set up a device-bound passkey. There's a lot of steps in there, and you need to choose a password manager. Even on iOS, right? You need to pick password manager. You need to download the Authenticator app. There are so many steps, and so many things can go wrong. People just don't even move to phishing resistant. They just stay with like you wouldn't believe it, but I mean, there's lots who are on SMS. Like we are an Entra show, and everyone listening, most people listening, have moved on from SMS. There are so many companies and like people who just use SMS just because it works for them. When they move to a new device, it still works. They don't suddenly lose access to their tenant, right? And that's why sync passkeys is the answer for the majority of the tenants. And if you're doing device bound, then you have to either buy FIDO2 keys, give it to everyone, have the infrastructure to manage people losing their keys, and then you're removing it and issuing them a new key. How do you send it out? If you're a global company, how do you send out the keys? I did a webinar with Ubico. They have a service where they take care of all of that. You tell them who the user is and what the address is. They ship the key to the user directly. And like there's a whole service they've built around that. So device bound has a lots of challenges. And what we are trying to do is how do we get more people to phishing resistant and sync passkeys gets at there. It's not still perfect. And Nathan, you've been playing around with a lot of how you can take out those keys, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can't secure something if you don't understand how it could be abused, right? And like how does that change our incident response plan, right? So historically, an account gone compromised, they just rotate the password, but you can rotate the password all day long and the attacker still has access. And it doesn't matter if they registered a device-bound, attested, passkey or not for that. We still have to clear that passkey out. So we need to go remove it. I think one of the biggest conversations we've had is Microsoft Authenticator. Lots of people are using it for push, which is great. And Microsoft Authenticator does support attestation. So you can leave that nice, strong quality there. The user literally just opens the app, clicks on their name, and there's a create passkey button there. And so they just click on that, and then they're up and running. They're already there. And so lots of places are using that. One issue that we do have, Android version, I think it was 13 or 14 and above, is where Passkeys tested and Microsoft Authenticator worked, but below that, they don't. And so then we're just like, we've got all these devices out there and the users can't use them. And maybe here in the US, it's not quite as big of a thing. It still is, but it definitely overseas a lot more. But Android back to version 9 supported Passkeys. And so if we enable Syncable, then all of those users are now opened up to save them in Google Password Manager. So there's definitely big advantages to allowing for synced, especially when it means that you're moving them away from weak passwords, SMS, other really weak methods. I'd rather take my chances that an attacker registers a software passkey that I have to go clean up versus what's inevitably going to be, phished or something. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Nuance.
and yeah, that's that's the key thing, right? Like a majority of customers that I've spoken to, they are looking to do just make sync passkey, just because the experience is so much better. That there is no Authenticator app to install. The whole challenge is getting people to go to the Play Store, search for Authenticator. They install the wrong one, so you have those challenges, right? And
that's if you can convince them to use their personal mobile as well.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Some states are like, oh yeah, you have to have a stipend, or you have to be reimbursed or whatever. And now you're like,
oh, okay. I'm not familiar with the states.
Yeah. Okay. So it gets every single one's unique. It's great. Now you got to keep track of all of it.
And so I think for the general, the large there are millions of Entra tenants. The synced passkey solves a lot of issues with using a strong phishing resistant authentication method as opposed to what they have today, and trying to move them off SMS. That's what our challenge is. How do you move people off something as convenient as SMS to something like a passkey, which has all the benefits? Like you move to a new phone, it just works. Cool. Awesome. So that's Passkeys. So let's take a quick pause to talk about AppGov Score from eNow Software. If manually managing risky apps in Entra ID feels overwhelming, this free tool gives you instant visibility into your app risk profile. In minutes, you'll get a benchmark score and insights across 24 key checks, plus a free 7-day upgrade to specific governance gaps to take action on immediately. So take the stress out of keeping Entra secure. Visit appgovscore.com and click try for free. That's appgovscore.com. Right. So the next one is also a follow-up, and this is for the blog post around conditional access, right? So we'll put that in the show notes. So this, if you read the change, we discussed this last time as well, but there's a blog post about conditional access, what is changing. Today, when a user signs in through a client application that only requests OIDC or some basic scopes, there's a list in that blog post like user.read and some basic graph scopes. Then if you have a conditional access policy that says target all resources, right? And if your policy has even one exclusion, then today what happens is that those apps are basically excluded from conditional access. So that means anyone can sign in without that particular CA policy being applied to that application. So the change that's happening is after this change that Microsoft will roll out. It's not yet rolled out. When it starts rolling out, even if they were excluded, they'll start being enforced. So before, if you have a policy today that says you can only come from a compliant device and it's targeting all resources, or if you're saying all resources and you need to do MFA, then after this change, those small bucket of applications that didn't see the MFA or didn't have device compliance being applied to them, they'll now start being prompted. Overall, it's improving the security of those applications.
And there's a rollout period there between March 27th and June So
Yeah.
that's the
So
that's the
between
rollout
March
period.
and June. So it's progressively, it's planned to roll out from towards the end of the month till June, right? So who is affected? You need to go and check your message center because there's a message going out to the tenants that are going to be affected, right? So like if your tenant is not affected, you wouldn't see it in your message center. So this is one thing where you need to go into message center and see. And if you have lots of tenants, then you need to go into each of the tenants to check their message center to see if your tenant is affected. But basically, if you have a policy that says all resources and you excluded even one app, then you're in scope for this. So that's the sort of the big change here. Have you come across this scenario before, Nathan or Daniel? Have you seen this in tenants?
You say, okay, I want to hear Nathan's scenario. I haven't come across this scenario, right? I've come across my plethora of terrible applications,
Right.
but not this particular challenge in the real world.
Yeah, I mean, we'll oftentimes get tickets or requests from organizations we work with where, hey, we're requiring MFA and this app isn't doing it. So when we go investigate and find out, yeah, it's got these low priv scopes that are listed in there and it was bypassing because it didn't require anything higher. Yeah, so we've seen it. I don't know, probably a couple dozen times. It's not massive. It's not all the time or anything. It's a pretty rare event for sure. But we do see it, and everybody's all confused. And thankfully, it was in the docs now, so it's like, yeah, a lot easier.
Yeah, why is this app not seeing an MFA prompt? They can just get in. And most of the time, if you have SSO turned on, most of the time they're hitting M365 first. And if you have MFA claim, they're getting that policy and it doesn't really matter. So in reality, it's really low when you actually see an app where you open a fresh browser session, you don't have a PRT or anything, and you're trying to access this one app which falls into the scope, and you see that, it doesn't require MFA because of this particular scenario. It only had some OpenID scope it was asking, or it only asked for like user.read, and then it's excluded from CA. So the change is, after this change starts rolling out, every app falls into this. There are no sort of default exclusions just because it's asking for limited scopes. So overall, it's not going to be a big change. It'll actually secure your tenant further, right? So apps that didn't see, if you had an MFA policy, which is what I'm thinking, like the majority of tenants will have all resources MFA, right? So I think the impact is smaller. But then if you do have an app where for some reason, we've heard feedback that I have this app and it can't do MFA, like how do I change it? And the problem now is, if it's a client app, you won't see it in Entra if you go to target resources. So with Entra, one of the things that people sort of confuse is Entra is about protecting server-side resources, right? So when you target an app, unless it's accessing, an API that's protected by Entra, like Graph API, public client applications, which are like desktop applications, mobile apps, and those single page apps, they're just running on the client, right? They don't even have a credential or a way to authenticate against them. So CA doesn't really apply to those when it's only just a public client. And that's the reason you have that way of, you can't target that one application, because any app can just take that app ID and you put it into an app and it's suddenly working as that application. Right.
Yeah, a big example of PowerShell, right? Microsoft Graph command line tools app. If you are trying to protect your app's access to Microsoft Graph, I've always recommended they use a second account and you target all resources and that account.
Yeah, if you have all
way.
resources, it targets all of that, right, including the PowerShell. But when you do an exclusion, that's an example of that. So so if you're going back to that story of, okay, you have a kiosk application and like a public client, and then you're applying this new CA policy rolls out. For whatever reason, this app maybe can't do a device compliance, and you don't want to do a device compliance. Once this change rolls out, it's really hard, because when you go to the picker, you won't see this client app in there because it's not a server-side resource. So what you can do as a workaround, if you need to exclude that app from your CA policy is to create like a dummy app in Entra, like a dummy API. You don't really have an API, but you just go to app registration, create an API, and then, you can do all of this in the portal. So no code change. You don't need to touch the actual application. And then you can go into the client application, the single page app, and you say, okay, this app is now calling into that API. You can add it as a permission, right? So you can link the two. Then once you do that, then you go to conditional access, and now you'll see that new API dummy app that you created, and you can now control it. You can now exclude that, etc., from the sign-in flow. So that's a way how you can control if you need to exclude it after this change rolls out. Just an admin level change that you can do.
There's an
control it.
argument there, right, Mel? So if you're a developer and you have to do this developer change, like you should probably maybe handle the conditional access challenge.
Yeah, add support for it, right? If you why can't you do device compliance? Maybe you have WebView, you're using some of those old school Android apps which can't support device compliance check to get the certs, and you should be using the right Android and iOS SDKs to so that app can get the system cert and present that to Entra and do the sign-in, right? So, yeah. The first thing is to fix your app. If you're an ISV who's building apps, and you should look at fixing it instead of this workaround. Nice. Right. So, yeah, we spend a lot of time on follow-up. So let's look at the next, the new thing that's happening. There is Entra Connect Sync update coming out.
The Entra Connect security update to block hard match for privilege roles. So this is something we touched on in the last episode around Microsoft hardening the hard match issue, where a compromised account has write access to Active Directory could potentially abuse an existing account to connect it to and do a hard match essentially. You could, while they've hardened it, if you still have hard matching enabled, you could potentially use that method to take over a privileged role. So now, starting in June 2026, like flat out Entra service side, they'll block hard matching of privileged roles. So you shouldn't really ever need to do this, right? And even with privileged roles, you should never a synchronized account. So if you're trying to do this, just take a step back and maybe do something else. Cloud only obviously is preferred for privileged roles, but if you do need to do it, the only way will be remove that role assignment, whether eligible or assigned, or if you're under P1, just assigned. So it drops down to a standard account. Do your hard match, and please don't reassign the role. Leave the role off and create a separate account. But if you need to reassign a role, then you can reassign a role.
One of our key things is always cloud only account, right? Keeping those separate. There was that whole, what was that, 3 or 4 years ago? Was it Alex Weiner, or I'm trying to remember who? But big deals about cloud takeover from on-prem and all that. I think Dr. Ajaydi had some play in that too, or Dr. Nestori. Yeah, and so anyway, the hard match and soft matching, I think currently soft matching is blocked for privileged roles, but hard matching wasn't. And so then we could do MSDS consistency GUID, right, in AD. If we knew what it was of an admin in cloud, we could take over the account and stuff. And so there's actually a feature flag that we've always been able to disable those on the Entra Connect Sync side. But now it looks like June 1st, I think, is the deadline. And then that is now enforced, and you can't undo it or whatever, right? So now we'd have to take off the roles, then set it, and then, but don't do that. Just create a dedicated cloud-only admin account for it. And you don't have to manage passwords anymore, which is great, right? They're just passkeys, and you don't need to rotate them or anything. So
this is a good opportunity to take a step back. And if you have privileged roles, this is a good example we covered in, I worked with Thomas and the others. We released a masterclass lab last week. And this was one of the topics that is in the lab, and you can work through that. So always have a different account, and don't have those privileged accounts be coming from on-prem. You can do it in the cloud. And Thomas introduced this neat linked feature that you have, not an Entra feature, but you can link an account, so you can have a relationship between the primary account and the privileged account. So you can sort of maintain them. So yeah, that's a neat one they did with all even the lifecycle workflow, cleaning up, when the primary account is gone, the linked account is also cleaned up. And it's a neat story of using all of the Entra features with ID governance to manage that, right? So yeah, so in this one, the real message here is take a step back, move to cloud-only accounts. All your privilege, don't have it come from on-prem, and don't have any on-prem accounts being assigned privileged backend things. So yeah, that's the thing you should look at implementing. But yeah, if it does take time, and so it's March now. If you were to start on it, depending on the size of your org, smaller numbers you can easily do this. But if it's a large org, it takes time, right, to get people to a new account, new identity, and switching over to that. Have you worked on any projects where you did that, like creating a whole cloud identity and setting them up for people?
Yeah, plenty. We, of course, right. I'm not the guy doing the work now. I'm the guy that sells Nathan's time to go and do the work, maybe. But a huge challenge is, especially for large organizations that maybe use MIM or provision directly to Active Directory from the HR system, is the operational aspect. They like to keep so the users who have the privileged accounts, it's all driven still from their HR platform. So they want to keep that consistent. So the privileged second account will still be delivered straight to Active Directory using their existing user provisioning method and synchronized up. And that's how things start to go wrong after time. So it's really either for them accounts or for all accounts provisioned directly to Entra, which is still a challenge in hybrid scenarios, although there is some changes with user SO. But it's really breaking that. You might have to break that provisioning process and just manage them separately. And in exponentially large environments, up into the hundreds, 200,000 users, it can be a challenge still.
Yeah. So I think that's the biggest challenge in this. It's the operational side of create that. It's easy to say, okay, let's create a cloud identity, and it's easy to do a one-off. Just go create a new user, set up a device-bound passkey, FIDO2, and you're all set. But the whole governance and how do you make sure that the right person is linked, and how do you trace, audit, and set up the whole governance, right? If you're using SailPoint, if you're using Entra ID governance, how do you set up that entire thing is when it becomes, a 3-month project in itself.
Well, we're making the justification harder now because we're putting all these nice security features in to prevent lateral movement. So are we convincing people to keep privileged accounts in hybrid? Hopefully not.
That's true.
We get a lot of pushback of so I worked for oil, water, gas. And so we had our ICS environment, DMZ, dev, test, the production, and then we had cloud. And it was gosh, I got 7 passwords I got to remember for all my accounts. Then we shove it all into a PAM solution. And then it's okay, anyway, it starts getting really convoluted because then I can't even use that with cloud until recently. They've started adding better support for that kind of stuff, and it's just, every place is in different states of how many different accounts do I have to manage. And so adding yet another admin account, that's always been a big pushback too. So Passkeys has greatly simplified a lot of that because now we don't have to remember the password. It's just actually the hardware token, even more secure anyway. So it's great. It's like a win-win. But yeah, every state's different. So we do still go through a lot of that.
You just need one of them. You need a token that you can hold multiple keys on, right? Otherwise, you're going to have a whole key ring full of tokens.
Totally. Yeah. And they store plenty of them on those YubiKeys and stuff. So it works great.
Yeah, there's also the practical aspect. It does make it harder because device-bound FIDO2s, so it's all good. But the moment you need to RDP into a device and then sign in from there, then your FIDO, unless there are lots of things that you need to do. On my Mac, it works awesome. I use the Windows app on my Mac, and I need to sign into my dev box or Windows 365 VM. And it's awesome. The FIDO2 key is on my laptop here, and I can just touch that. It works in the remote session. So it's awesome when it works. And if you meet those criteria, it works. If it's a server that's not joined to anything and you remote into it and you're using RDP, not using the new latest and greatest stuff, then your account suddenly doesn't work inside that VM.
Well, for the MSPs out there, they might use a plethora of kind of remote access solutions. like maybe a ConnectWise or or whatnot. So that presents another challenge for organizations managing multiple.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. So if you can take this as an opportunity to fix those privileged accounts and move them off, but if not, it's just hardening it, right? It's as a customer, like what should I be worried about with this change? What should I go and look for?
I mean, it's only going to be the new, right? It's net new. So when we do try to do a takeover of a cloud account because we've got this new hire or whatever situation, right? So as of June 1st, we start seeing blocking messages and it just won't work. So hopefully it's not really going to be an impacting change. Mostly it'll be like a retroactive, like, why is this not functioning the way that it used to? And then they're going to investigate and find out, oh yeah, they made this change and darn it, Microsoft. But no, it's good, right?
Yeah. So the next update that came is external authentication methods is now GA. Have you come across a lot of people using external auth methods? And what is external authentication method for those who don't know?
Yeah, so this is the ability to use an external MFA provider or identity provider to perform that MFA step when you're signing in, and also for it to be trusted by conditional access, right? Because prior you has to build maybe custom claims and it wouldn't pass MFA into the access token to be trusted by Entra. So this actually was announced 2 years ago, right? I think in February, early 2024, it was announced. It's been in preview for 2 years. We had a lot of customers push back. There was a lot of nervousness around it. Okay, it's in preview. We're going to put all our users through this external platform, didn't feel that the trust there yet to put all our eggs in that basket. But now it's finally GA. Hopefully a lot of customers and organizations are going to start trusting it. And if you are still on, are the custom claims still a thing? Can you still do that? Can't remember the name of it.
You're talking about custom control, right? The old
Custom
one.
controls, that's the one.
Yeah.
No, yeah. But for those who are still doing it, now's the time to flip to external authentication methods.
Yeah. Actually, I have walkthroughs, I think, on socials for Duo and Okta, both of them when they first came out. We do a lot of it. I mean, it became a big issue, right, when we started doing mandatory MFA. And of course, the MFA that was coming through looked like single factor. And then we do the custom auth thing and it wouldn't come through as like an MFA on the grant, on the claim, right? So then when you went to access a portal, it was like, oh, that MFA you did at Duo doesn't count.
Yeah.
And so,
so you that's one of the biggest reasons why when custom controls was done, it was sort of like not proper. It was like it only went to public preview. It never went to GA, the old custom controls. And so that was like an experimental feature. The way they implemented it, it didn't add it into the claim itself. So it was just a conditional access sort of bypass. Like you do the auth method and it comes through and it goes through. But you couldn't use that to do, for example, self-service, like, doing a password reset. It didn't work when you went into any of the other scenarios that needed MFA. It was only as you hit a CA and the CA can send you there, and that was all. So it had a bunch of limitations, and the external method sort of standardized that. A lot of people had to move off Entra. They would federate into a completely different IDP because they couldn't do that. So this is another set of use cases where you can move the primary auth back to Entra and you just need to set up external auth method. So if your user is already registered and you're using like a Cisco Duo, Okta Verify or RSA tokens, which is quite common, you can still continue to use all of that. But now your primary auth is in Entra. Then you can use a lot of the auth features as well, right? When you move back to Entra, a lot more conditional access features light up, a lot of the auth methods and like the campaigns, registration campaigns, and even the user experience is a lot better. So yeah, it's a time to revisit if you are federating today with Entra just because you want to use another MFA provider. You can now switch the primary auth back to Entra and just only use this for the MFA. The reason, I know the story behind why it took 2 years. So they're waiting on implementing a feature because the key thing is there's no way Entra knew whether a user had, let's say, for example, set up Cisco Duo or if they had a RSA token. So let's say, those RSA devices where you punch in those numbers. So before this went GA and a few changes before that. Entra had no way of knowing if you actually had RSA token or not. So if you added a user into scope, it would send you and say, like, do an RSA sign in and come back. And if the user didn't have a token, they were like blocked. There was no way they could go through the process of even like, let's say RSA has a registration process. They get the token the first time, maybe they had to set up a PIN or something like that. There was no way Entra knew whether that user was set up or not. For authentication methods, we would walk them through, like in Authenticator, like if the user didn't have Authenticator for the first time, it would step them up and let them register the Authenticator app and then sign in. So it would send them to a different place, right? So Entra could say, you don't have Authenticator set up, so let me send you to the process to set up Authenticator, and then you come back and sign in. So now there is actually a flag in Entra which knows whether that user has that external auth method set up or not, and then it can send them to different places. So that's
so that
the
tells
reason.
a really nice story, and it does explain a lot on why there's been some struggles with being able to enforce, a particular external method during sign-in rather than just enforce MFA in general.
Exactly. It's two different flows, right? Yeah.
We can also like pre-force them through it, right? So we go to the user, add an authentication method. There's an option for external auth, and then you choose the one that you want if you have multiple. And then that, like when they sign in, they get forced right over to the correct one instead of getting prompted for Entra or choose another way and then, whatever.
Right.
So, yeah.
So that's
cool.
what a lot of organizations I've seen had to do to make that experience a little bit better for their end users, whether it's a PowerShell script to loop through everyone or not.
Yeah. And they had to make sure, like before they added the user to that policy, they had to make sure that the user was set up before. So until it went to GA, that was a thing they had to do. But even now, you need to really find out if your auth method provider has implemented those. So the Entra has made the APIs available, but if you're using Cisco Duo or RSA or whatever the auth method, there is some stuff that they do to let Entra know whether the user is registered or not. And you need to make sure that they support all those things. So this is one of those features where it's not an Entra only feature. It's the third, the other provider that you're using, whether they support all the features for the GA. So yeah, it's a neat feature for those where you're not using passkeys. Like if you're using passkeys, then none of this is even a thing we need to talk about. If you're using especially using passkeys or even device bound, right? You're covered. It doesn't even come into this flow.
Yeah. But if you've done the hard work of like getting everything in passkeys with like FastPass or something on the Okta side, it does allow you to still migrate that authentication over to Entra while still kind of sending the users over there for when they have those registered, right? So there's some interesting flows. If you're in the middle of a migration or something, right? You want to simplify the steps.
Right. Cool. So auth method is GA. That's a cool feature. Lifecycle workflow. What are those changes in ID governance?
Yes, so I think there's a couple of gone GA now. So I think since October, you've had this expanded support for additional attributes to trigger these lifecycle workflows. So custom security attributes within Entra, that's where you create that additional app and you add the attributes to the app and you can put it on the user that's the directory extension attributes. But also the on-premise attributes, the 1 to 15 attributes you get pulled from AD into the cloud. So that's gone GA. So if you're one of them timid organizations that don't want to adopt the preview features, you can go and do that now. Great for hybrid environments to have a little bit of flexibility on what you're using to trigger. There's still this kind of caveat, I think. I don't know if it's changed. It's in the documentation still where there's 4 hours delay period for them custom attributes still. So it's something to take into consideration.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, I worked in an org where there was a whole licensing engine we built back. This was many, many years ago based on the security attributes. So if you're a full-time employee, you would get a full an E3 or E5 license. If you're a contractor, you wouldn't get it unless you really needed it because, they might have their own work, another email address they would use if they were coming in from another company. And yeah, there's so much we built. It took us 6 months to write an actual code and deploy it and have these services running that do all this work, right? Based on the job code or the org data that puts in by HR and then comes from the HR system into Entra ID. It goes to Azure ID, comes into Entra ID, and then we do the licensing stuff. And I'm sure there are lots of other scenarios like that. And now you can just move off all of those handmade scripts and things like that, especially if you have lifecycle workflows with ID governance. It's just configuring these things, and you're easily set up to do those. Yeah, it's a lot of extension options, right? With this neat ways you can solve the problem.
Yeah, great for complex environments where you've built custom licensing engines, for sure.
Yes.
Apps we've seen doing a lot of that stuff, right? And just storing the data wherever, grabbing it, and trying to make all this automation stuff. So it's super nice. We can just put it in an attribute and away it goes and does it for us.
Yeah, and it's all in one place, right? Like you don't have different stores. It's in one place.
I think that's the core thing. It's a supported technology rather than Joe Bloggs' PowerShell script that runs in Azure Automation on the free tier that does all this stuff that no one knows. And it's undocumented and uncommented. So yeah, absolutely. I think the next one was delegated workflow management. So admin units within the lifecycle workflows.
What's that change? What does that do?
So it's one of them things. So it's just gone GA, but it ensures that only the specific authorized admins can view, configure, and execute specific workflows that are relevant to the scope that admin units scope for.
So how have you seen it being used, Daniel? This or Nathan?
I haven't seen it used with lifecycle workflows. Obviously, with other parts of Entra. Have you seen it used with lifecycle workflows?
I think one of the bigger issues that we'll have is like multinational, right, organizations where they've got like, I'm an admin over US, but not over other areas. And I need to divide that up. But like the person has way more permissions because they just need to be able to customize all the lifecycle workflows and everything. So now it allows us to say, okay, well, you can manage all the lifecycle workflows for the US based users and hiring and everything that happens there. But then also, delegate that out a little differently and kind of scope the permissions, which is what AUs have always been intended for. It's just they haven't historically been used much, and then Purview finally started adding some, and now we've got this over here utilizing it too. So it's kind of nice to see that expand.
I see that I see a lot of jerry-rigged versions of admin units in Intune with role-based controls and everything. So lots of organizations, they like to control which apps can be deployed on their specific sets of devices as well. It would be nice to see more admin units being used.
Yeah, all the various tags every product uses.
Fascinating one, multinational with different countries, and they have their own HR rules and how it should work, right? Within each company, like regulatory and other things. So this is a neat way to delegate a lot of that and say you manage it, right? Yeah. Nice. Right. Then we come to all the GSA related things, and there are some cool things that it opens up, right? So this is something where even if you're not using GSA, it's good to know about it, because when someone comes to you with a problem and now you have I can achieve that with a global secure access and private access. So Nathan, you want to walk us through that change?
Sure. Yeah, there's two changes. Actually, kind of a third one, I guess.
If you count, right? These are new features.
Oh my gosh. It's moving so fast. Yeah, GSA has a ton of investment going on right now. It's awesome. Hard to keep track. So the previous month, I think they did the B2B guest. Is that when? Anyway, it's a recent ad if it wasn't January last month. So that allowed us to kind of switch which tenant we were dealing with as a guest account, right? So if I had it in my primary, I could then switch to another and connect to a guest tenant and that kind of stuff. And then this month, we're doing public preview on BYOD. So one of the things that I like about this, a lot of times we'd have employees at home. They'd install the VPN client from the Palo, right? They'd go to the vpn.company.com, download it, install in their personal, they connect in, and then they have access to stuff. And so we still see this traditional workflow all the time. One of the neat things that we get with Global Secure Access, it's not, it can be like a traditional VPN, but we can really limit scope of what they have access to. But when they install it as a BYOD support, it automatically registers the device against Entra as part of the flow. So you get two really neat things out of it. One is phishing resistance, because now the device is registered. So we know the state, what the device is and conditional access, we can actually leverage that information. We can also leverage the fact that it's connected to GSA is another key part. And then that allows us to enforce the continuous access evaluation pieces too, because it's coming through GSA infrastructure. The moment that malware, maybe living on that user's home device, takes that token out to wherever the attacker is, they try to use it and it's not going to be honored because it didn't come through the GSA infrastructure. So, for those who are still using that traditional workflow, and it even works if you have what am I looking for? VDI type infrastructure, Citrix, whatever that you're connecting into.
Yeah.
It'll even still work.
This is
for
only
that.
for private apps, right? Apps that
Correct.
may be on-prem or those VDI.
That's a great call out. Yeah. Because there is an internet access and web content filtering piece.
Yes.
And that is not supported. So you're not going to filter your people's home devices or flow them through the secure web gateway. Yeah. So it's private access only. But, if you're giving them access to VDI or on-prem apps and things, it's a great way to kind of lock that down a little bit more than maybe a traditional VPN would. So, yeah.
Just reading the preview documentation, it's if you have a corporate owned device and you're getting BYOD access into another organization's resources, it's not going to be able to be used for that. If your device is already joined or hybrid, the GSA client's going to stick to that tenant.
There are currently a lot of limitations around the ability to switch between different tenants. If it's whichever one you register against first, it's locked to that tenant as well. So if it's a quote unquote BYOD, personally owned. So yeah, if you have employees who work for 3 or 4 different companies and they all have GSA, currently they won't be able to switch between which one. It's whichever they register to first. There's some nuances between Mac and Windows and stuff too. So definitely check the docs on it for the limitations. But I even the way they worded it, right? Let me see if I can find it. It says at this time or something like that, right? For now is what they put in the docs. So it's for now, right? So it's clear. This is not the intended long-term goal here. You'll be able to switch between those. And we can kind of already see that with the B2B guest stuff. So I don't think we're spilling any beans there. So yeah.
And I like the other one, custom block pages.
Absolutely. The ability to do custom block pages. So I know a lot of times people are in conditional access, I would really like to be able to tell a user why they can't access a resource. We get that request all the time. So for those scenarios, we can do Defender for Cloud Apps and we can send it out to an access policy there. And so we get that really nice little, here's the custom reason why you can't access this resource. Sometimes we're concerned about giving the attacker too much information, right? But for this, it might be, they're hitting specific apps and they're not coming from the right region or location, or maybe it's a certain category filtering that's occurring. And we want to give them a little bit more of this is the reason why you can't reach this source because it's a brand new website, it's a park domain, something like that. And you want to give them a little more details hey, if this is actually a false positive, please contact IT. You might have some unique scenarios. We can now do custom block pages under certain circumstances, which is pretty nice.
Are you limited, Nathan? You're not going to be able to do custom CSS and HTML. I think it's just text and kind of markdown language.
Yeah, it's, as far as I know, it's just whatever's in you can put into a little page there. It's in the GSA settings.
Yeah, the markdown. You can give mostly markdowns.
Yeah.
So if you have links in there, that would work. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I think they're making a change on that too. Did I see that right? The CSS on the sign-in page too?
That's on the general sign-in page. Yeah, that's going away.
Yeah, that was a shame. People like that for efficient pages and whatnot.
A lot of bad people like it as well.
Yeah, true. I think there's 2 things we'll just cover off super quick. I think there was the new end user homepage for the My Account portal, which was quite nice. Right?
Nice.
Doesn't load very well for.
Yeah.
So any pending actions that you have, you don't need to click down into the individual pages now. It just appears there on the screen. So it's quite clear if there's any group approvals or access reviews you need to do. It'll appear right there.
Right. So this is for customers who are using access packages and access reviews. You get a much better experience now.
Essentially, otherwise you'd have used to have to go to My Account, .microsoft.com and click through each of the different tabs to see what you have pending. So now you get that nice experience. You can switch back to the old experience. You have the banner at the top of the page when you sign in. Of course, there's not necessarily much reason to switch back, but you can do.
Nice.
And the last one was just Entra Connect Sync now supports Windows 7 2025. I think that was actually, the documentation actually updated in January. But I think, of course, the announcement, and you just hit the page. There were still some known issues. So if your server 2025 VM server doesn't have the October 20 update, then there might be some group-related sync issues. So just making sure you're on the latest version of Windows Server 2025 before you deploy that. Microsoft still recommends going to Cloud Sync, despite some of the limitations for larger environments or hybrid as well. But of course, it now supports Exchange Hybrid, and it's quite good in mergers and acquisition scenarios. We see it quite often.
Nice. There's an Authenticator app update as well, right? With jailbreak detection for just Android.
Yeah, and that was only on Android, right? I believe so.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking for the timeline on that because it's not on the dock there. We'd have to go to the message center. But yeah, there's a given timeline where they say it'll start prompting the user, let them know, and then eventually they'll get a block, and then they'll actually get wiped, the data there. So at some point. But yeah, if they're using jailbroken Android devices, because when you're manipulating the software stack, how can you really trust what's happening under the hood there? So, or you lose a lot of trust, I should say. Should never really trust it outright, but yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is on the Android, and it will inform the user. So if you're starting to hear stuff from your users saying, "Oh, Authenticator stopped working," and they're seeing these messages. So I think to prepare for this, you just need to let your IT support teams know and let the users know that they can't jailbreak or root the Android device, which I don't think many people do nowadays. It used to be like fairly common for Android, but I think they might be using devices that are completely jailbroken.
And I think it depends on how it's checking it too, because if we're using Google Play services versus the actual attestation API, which I think most of it's using Google Play services, and then it requires that the Android device, have that on there in the first place. And then privacy-focused stuff a lot of times doesn't include the Google services, so those won't work, like a Graphene OS, right? And there's ways to get it to run on there and things, but
yeah, or you get a phone shipped in from somewhere, right, where Play services are not there, and those phones would stop working as well. So if you just need to give a heads up to your help desk team saying, if people come with this, it's just tell them to use a supported device and make sure that they don't have it rooted. Cool. Awesome. Nice. Any other shout outs you want to make? Something cool you learned you want to share?
Not at the moment, I don't think. Apart from all the cool work Nathan's been doing with Passkeys.
You should definitely check out if you're interested in Passkeys. Nathan's been doing a lot of cool research, and especially with how it works. So you learn a little bit under the hood, right? How all of it works, and I think that's a good knowledge to have for Entra admins. So you know how it works and what other things that can happen with Passkeys and sync Passkeys, so you are sort of aware of how you can protect it well.
The other cool thing that I think of with sync Passkeys gives us an opportunity anyway with PAM solutions. Like historically, we're just rotating passwords. And with a PAM solution, we can substitute that with a private key that's backed by an HSM module, right? So it kind of neat. Like we could have really nice, strong, secure certificates stored, and we don't need a PKI infrastructure with curls and all the other junk, right? that goes along with it.
Yeah.
To maintain. So like, moving all those administrative accounts to get automatically provisioned, just reaching into Key Vault or whatever resource and generate.
Awesome. Yeah. So definitely check out Nathan. Yeah. Share me those links, Nathan, and I'll add them to the show notes.
Totally. We'll have to include the AZD Maester stuff. That's pretty cool. I'm excited for that. It's like single command, and it just sets up all the Maester monitoring for you. Like just on a weekly schedule, it just generates the new reports, publishes it to a web page if you want it. Going through the docs and like trying to manually point click and create all the resources, it can get pretty complicated. That's pretty fun. Like simplify it for people.
Yeah, the thing I released this week is at graph.pm.
Yes, so I installed that actually.
Yeah.
Oh, you tried it out? Okay.
The skill?
Yes, it's a Microsoft Graph skill. Like MCPs are so 2025 now.
Q4.
Yeah, it's crazy how fast it changes. But I mean, you can use it with an MCP as well. So what I did there is I took all the docs for Graph API, all the endpoints and the Open API reference. I put them all into a database, and the skill has all of it embedded. So the LLM now has access to all of the docs through that skill, and it can get to the right API instead of trying to guess. Because what it would do before is it would try different endpoints. It would know the actual spec of the Open API, and it would get parameters wrong and so on. So this has all of it included. Hopefully the LLM can do better instead of like wasting your tokens, trying out different calls and then figuring out the right one. It should be able to do it well. So yeah, it's a neat thing. I need to do a video. I just don't have the time to walk people through. But another cool thing I added to that is that the community can contribute samples, because sometimes for a common, like if it's a new feature, or especially if it's a new feature, like things related to global secure access and new APIs, and you don't find any documentation. So the LLM has nothing to go on. So through the portal, you can submit a sample. It just goes into a GitHub to a pull request, and you can give multi-turn. Like if you want, how do you do this? And you can give just the REST APIs. You don't have to do a lot, but you can just give a list of the REST APIs to do something, and you put that in, and then it just improves the whole graph experience for everyone. So yeah, it's as we move to using agents to help us do things, or at least figure out APIs, it's a neat way to ask questions and get to an answer faster.
Yeah, good disclaimer. Don't just give your LLM write access to your tenant.
Yes, to the
That's why you
tenant.
lab it.
Yeah.
Give it a lab. Yeah. I'd do everything in a lab. How does that compare with, because my workflow has actually been to clone the public docs and just keep that in sync, and then point the LLM
Yes.
at the local files because they're all in Markdown, right? And then it can grep it and like everything's great. But I mean, I'd imagine in a database, it's probably a lot more performant and uses less tokens.
Yeah, that's what I used to do as well. But it's the performance, like it just does a grep, and like the docs are big, right? So I played around and I put it all into, so that when it builds the skill, compiles it into puts it in a database. So it's like a lot more faster, and the LLM you don't need to wait time for it to come back. And it includes both the Open API spec, and it includes the docs. And so there are 3 databases in the skill. So the Open API spec itself, which is like quite big, the docs, which has, like in the docs, we say this column supports these filter options and things like that. So instead of doing trial and error, it can actually know what things are supported if it's there, and then the custom one. So I think if a lot of people use it and they start giving more examples of, it can be anything, right? From Intune to like all of Graph. If you give more examples of how to do something for a typical query, I think that, because that's where it's like a recipe, right? If you can give it a recipe of, like a good example is, how do you find out the global admins? And you do need to check if you have PIM or not. And then if you have PIM, you need to call the eligibility schedule, and you need to, like, there are 2 things. So that whole list of things you can make as a recipe and contribute to that skill, and then it gets embedded. I, of course, review it before I merge stuff in, but you're just calling REST APIs anyway. You're giving a list of the APIs to call. So
That's a great example.
Yeah.
Because the legible kind of roles, like there's some limitations where getting illegible roles, you need like read-write permissions, where you can get role management directory read. And like the docs don't necessarily present the least privilege sometimes.
Yes, yeah. So I think we should have got fixed, but yeah, that's one color. Yeah, so I mean, as we move to using LLMs more, and like you can do a lot of things a lot faster now with it. So if you're not using it, you're sort of really slowing down yourself if you're not using these newer ways of at least trying them out. I think it's an important skill now to know. For me, my workflow has changed like completely in the type of things that I can do and build. And even I'm sure for Nathan, I know like you've done so much more than like it extends our skill set, right? Compared to before we had access to these tools.
Yeah, it's made things a lot easier. One of the things that I found helpful, especially with the passkeys, is we can register those against any account. So give it like a limited roles, whether it's custom scope or a reader role or something like that, right? And then you can start like building out scripts to write reports and all kinds of stuff. And there's little risk in it, messing something up. It's just grabbing data, right? So it's kind of neat because you can here's your passkey file, here's the little script to go authenticate, and now you have full graph access. Go build me scripts that do things, and it's like all.
Yeah, that's a neat thing. We should definitely do wrap it in a module, a PowerShell module too.
Yeah. We did add it to the XDR internals. So, we can now authenticate with a software passkey using an AI, pull down a full device timeline, user timeline, and then let it reason over it for incidents and alerts and stuff. So a lot of times with advanced hunting, we can only go 30 days back in hunting data. And if you're not storing it out in Sentinel or something, you're kind of out of luck, but it's all there in the timeline. You just have to individually go to every machine and look at them all or users or whatever. So this lets it actually pinpoint, here's the time and the reference, and go grab all the details straight out of those timelines and reason over it locally and stuff. So there's some really cool opportunities. I'm excited. Yeah.
And you don't need to worry about app permissions and you can just use the delegated permissions, right? So
yes. So I'm creating an AI admin account, I guess, an admin account for the AI, assigned at the unified RBAC role. Just like here, you get read access to a limited scope of stuff, right? That I want you to have access to, and then I give it the passkey that I just generated for it, and it authenticates using that, and then goes and does the investigation and stuff. So I think there's some really neat opportunities for IR.
Yeah, that's neat. With Meister, we have that issue, right? With Meister and even other tools. If you're running in SD or GitHub, if you use you need to give an app with app permission, which is really broad, and you don't want to do that. So it's always been a struggle creating apps and setting up those permissions correctly for Meister to run those assessments in an automated way.
Yeah. And it's all in the AZD. I did it with managed identities and granted all the correct limited permission scopes and everything in AZD in that one that I put together.
Nice.
It even does the managed identity to the Compliance and Security and Compliance Center. I found out that it was just a wrapper for the EXO modules. And so the same commands that work for EXO was able to be done against the security and compliance using a managed identity. So it's
nice. Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Wow.
I might have to pick your brains, Nathan. I have a challenge at the moment where I've managed to figure out multi-tenant managed identity federation for Graph API. I built a little wrapper called MyToken. I need to figure that out for Exchange, Teams, SharePoint Online, Power BI, all the other modules.
So you do the app registration, right, with the federated credential to another tenant's Azure, right? And then on that app registration, you use that app registration to create the linked service principal in Exchange and SharePoint. And then from there, you grant those permissions to that linked service principal, and you should be able to authenticate, get the token inside, and then access all the resources through that app registration.
Okay.
Yeah, nice. I know. I'm trying to work through the exact same thing right now with the AZD Meister that I just put together. I'm trying to figure out, okay, now if I wanted to run this out of GitHub or somewhere else, or an ADO instance that's mine, but reach out to multiple tenants, how does that end up looking? So yeah, working through that right now too. But it should be a federated credential on that app registration, and then it'll reach out and do all the things. So, and then the Meister test for the entire Defender stack is the other thing that I'm working on at the moment. So we give it a unified RBAC to read only on the permissions for various things. And then it can talk to the internal APIs right inside of the Defender portal and read stuff that we can't touch with a public. So yeah, lots of fun stuff that all opens up for us.
That is so cool. Yeah. Can't wait to get all of that added. I want to add a new section in Meister on how to set up the user account with passkeys and store it in Key Vault, and cool.
Yeah. Or just really create it natively in Key Vault. Yeah, you're good. Yeah. So cool.
Awesome. Good sauce.
Yeah. Pretty wild.
Awesome. Thank you. And AI helps us do all of this, right?
Totally. Yeah.
It does. It really does.
It's just since Feb, I went on vacation in December, and the stuff that I was doing, it was helpful. But since I came back in Feb, and I've been trying the new models like 4.5, 6, and they are it's crazy how good they are and how good they get it right the first time itself. Yeah, exciting times. Cool. Thanks so much for coming on. I know it's super late for you, Daniel, and Nathan
we haven't eaten yet, and it's just
wow, sorry,
just topics.
Wow,
it's all good. Just listening to Nathan talk has kept me fueled.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm sure it's awesome, right? To hang out and just geek out.
Yeah. There's not many people up here in Alaska.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks so much, folks. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. All right. See you soon.